Shadow or Death baseline. Surrender to madness will kill you, and a lot of other things that will bring tears to your eyes for Shadow Priest in the Shadowlands expansion. And not in the "she finally noticed my feelings and advances I have been making for the past 10 years" kind of good way. So let's check them out together. Make sure to leave a corner empty in your room so you can squat in it and cry after this video. Jokes aside, we stream and playtest all of the specs on our stream at twitch.tv/Marcelian&Online, and if you think Shadow Priest is in a poor state, catch me trying to not fall off elevators and then convince Marcelian we can still do class guide. Leave a follow and stuff. Cheers. Right now the alpha is still fairly early, so some of the things we will cover might not make it to live, and this time we really hope they don't, because Shadow needs a lot of love. With an increased level of negativity present in the current WoW community, we try to shine a light on the positives as well. It's a bit hard to shine a light on a Shadow. Hey! Oh, thank you for this awesome award. I would like to give a special thank you to Shadow for being a trash spec once again. At least you got some shit baseline. Desperate Prayer is available to all specs now, and this can only be a good thing. 25% HP boost for shit situations is pretty good, considering Shadow really only had one defensive cooldown in Dispersion. Although not affecting Shadow at all, Mind Here and Power Word Shield are also baseline, but Mind Soothe is making a return. Now, the usefulness of this relies solely on how the range mobs will be designed, and I assume we have a higher chance of seeing this in dungeons and questing than anywhere else. There could be some Mythic Plus implications in higher keys if we are to judge this in a BFA context. One thing to note is that most spells that are baseline, for instance Mind Blast, have a rank 2 that pertains to their respective specs, because Mind Blast is available to the other specs as well. In the case of Shadow, there are two that we need to discuss. First, Mind Blast comes with a 7-second cooldown reduction, which causes rotational problems and feels like it's clogging it up and making it clunky. The main reason is the GCD once again. Mind Blast was in a good state in BFA, where the cooldown reduction it had was 7.5 seconds, which is a multiplied number of the GCD duration, hence making it fit in the rotation without downtime, aka waiting for cooldowns, holding off on casting a less important spell to cast Mind Blast, and so on. Void Bolt has a different issue. With the rank 2 change, Void Bolt can be casted without breaking Mind Flay. On the surface, this seems to fix the issue you had of always interrupting Mind Flay, but again, it's an issue artificially created by the devs, because with all my love for Blizzard and their passion for the game, the devs are just not playing Shadow, and the change is an obvious example as to why. Void Bolt breaking Mind Flay made it so you could use it, incur the GCD to move and reposition ever so slightly. This is important because Shadow has no mobility, and too many of its casts are hard casts. The more subtle issues with this are that to be optimal and feel like you are playing right, you always want to cast Void Bolt during a Mind Flay to maximize the damage output, which means breaking a Mind Flay early to start a new one as Void Bolt becomes ready, so they are casted simultaneously. So in the end, you still have to break Mind Flays. If you don't do that with the GCD system, Void Bolt ends up a lot of the times being casted just as your Mind Flay finishes, hence rank 2 has no impact on the playstyle, aka why you want to break the cast early so that the 1.5 seconds of the GCD from Void Bolt overlaps with the remaining time of Mind Flay. These might seem like nitpicks, but this just proves how hard it is to get Shadow right, because the issues are there and they add up to create a less than desirable playstyle, at least compared to all other specs in the game. Lastly, and probably the most impactful, is Shadow Word Death baseline and redesign. Now, the skill is on a short cooldown reduced by haste and so far has a few functionalities. Pop it, you deal damage and instantly generate insanity, 15 to be precise, and if the target doesn't die from it, as in a killing blow, you also take that damage. The damage it deals is less than a Mind Blast, but it is instant and on-demand insanity, helping with reaching Void Form a bit quicker, if you don't mind the damage to the face, that is. So maybe be glad it deals less damage? It being part of the baseline kit is great for Shadow, but losing the execute functionality, that is the new word, takes away some of its fantasy and maybe makes it feel less impactful than we once remembered. Numbers can always change, however, so we will keep our eyes peeled. Currently, there are 2 abilities available for testing in the normal content of Shadowlands Outside World, hence non-Torghast, and even that not implemented fully, so take all of this with a grain of salt. Boon of the Ascended is the Kyrian ability, and it's probably one of the coolest looking and feeling ones, albeit less viable on paper. Essentially, you empower yourself for 10 seconds, gaining access to Ascended Nova that hits everyone in AoE, and Ascended Blast that replaces Mind Flay. The Nova deals damage to enemies and healing to allies around you, while the Blast is a stronger single target version with the same effect. Each target hit gives you a stack from Nova and 4 from Blast. At the end of the effect, you explode, damaging and healing respective targets based on how many stacks you accumulated. In a vacuum, this spell is incredible and super fun to use, if only for those measly 10 seconds. The main issue is that it has absolutely no interaction with the actual Shadow kit. It does not generate insanity, it does not pause insanity depletion, so essentially, you take a break from your spec and do this fun shit for 10 seconds. It's weird in this sense, mostly because Shadow is so reliant on maintaining a fluid flow of insanity and void form stacks rolling to be actually viable. The only way you wouldn't care about your insanity is if this dealt incredibly stupid numbers, which again takes you out of your Shadow, resets your ramp progress, and it's hard to balance the numbers in such a way that losing all of this would be worth it. Alternatively, you have Mind Games from the Venthyr Covenant that is on a much shorter cooldown and reverses the mentality of the mob. This means that the target will heal its targets that it's attacking and damage itself while trying to heal itself. Every time one of these events happen, you generate insanity. Not only does this smooth your rotation, giving you an extra source of insanity generation for a few seconds, but is also super fun to use. Although I was able to test it in Torghast only, Unholy Nova is an interesting ability from the Necrolords. You blast enemies in an AoE for a decent amount of damage, and anybody in your group that damages the affected targets will get healed for quite a bit. This seems incredible in Mythic Plus or raid fights with adds and can essentially be considered a minor healing cooldown, giving the other 2 a hard time to contest with. The interesting part of this is that the healing is fixed and gets applied for each instant of damage, so that means dot ticks will heal the most. On a 1-minute cooldown only, this seems a lot stronger than the other 2 in high-end content and a pretty good group utility overall. Might be a reason to get Shadow into Mythic Keys. Hey! At least we have one reason. Oh, I shouldn't be laughing so much. In terms of talents, only 2 changed, and probably this is the biggest issue with Shadow, being a spec that relied heavily on Azurite traits like Corrosive Insanity to make the spec actually work. First off, we have Death and Madness that takes the place of the Shadow Word Death, which is now baseline. The effect gives you a window of 6 seconds for the target to die, so you can get a reset on the cooldown and a much higher, bigger insanity generation effect spread over 4 seconds. The window is something nice and maybe should be added to the baseline effect of the spell, since its underwhelming damage output makes it unreliable to get a killing blow with it. Granted, the talent fixes it. Actually, no, it doesn't. See, the 2 effects happen separately, whereas in you can death a target and it doesn't die, so you take the damage to the face, but it can die in 3 seconds, so you get the cooldown reset and insanity generation back. The cooldown reset seems to be wonky at times, the moment where sometimes it doesn't proc. If you time your death right after a Mind Blast or some other source of damage that put them both in the same damage event or instance or second or whatever, Death might not be the one dealing the killing blow, but since it was queued, it still went off cooldown with no reset following after, and also no insanity generation. This either seems like an oversight or hopefully a bug that will be rectified later on. Second, Surrender to Madness has been changed once again, and from someone that liked and still thinks the concept is interesting and should be kept in game, the implementation Blizzard is choosing for the multiple iteration this talent had time and time again seem to be lackluster. Right now, it's a 2-minute cooldown down from 3 and buffs you for 25 seconds to generate 100% more insanity, while also instantly popping Void Eruption regardless of your insanity levels. The Void Eruption is a nice quality of life and effect added in. The other problem is twofold actually. One, the duration of the buff is too short for something that's supposed to kill you at the end, and two, if the target dies quicker, you lose whatever seconds of the buff you had. Both of these effects seem counterintuitive, the first one being the duration, and if you are thinking, well, Flame, why not just pop it 24 seconds before the boss dies? Duh. Really? One of the problems with this design is that the spell has a target, which state of living is a condition for you to either live or die. Hence, the target must die for you to live. Hence, this can only be used on a trash for 25 seconds for extra damage on that one particular trash with whatever cleave you can muster on the boss, or at least a few seconds of a boss fight, in which you are not the only damage dealer, making it unreliable that the target will die in those 25 seconds. I'm not sure if the design intent is to have this work for priority adds, in which case making it maybe a 1-minute cooldown is a much more sensible change, because if you use it to pad the damage on the boss, you risk the ad not dying during the effect, and these 25 seconds or this 25-second window can have all sorts of implications that make it extremely unviable. The second issue ties more into the alpha, and everyone right now assumes it's a bug, hopefully. If your target dies a few seconds after you pop this, or however long it takes, you lose all the remaining benefits, even if you had 20 or so seconds left of the buff. If this is a bug, you can actually use this to proc a 25-second super buff on yourself by instantly pop it on a minor ad that will die in 2 globals or really quickly, so that you can switch the rest of the time on the boss. The issue with that is that it's very obviously not the way it's intended to be used and feel. Lastly, and actually a much bigger issue, is that it contests with Legacy of the Void, which is consistent 100% of the time with no downside or risk-reward factors baked into it. And all of these issues wouldn't be a problem if the reward for taking such a high risk, or both talenting it and subsequently even using Surrender to Manus, would be worth it. And it's not. Okay, it's early alpha, we get it, but it feels like Shadow got the short end of the stick once again, and the community is scared it will turn into another BFA launch for Shadow, where wanding would have been a more optimal way to play than actually playing the rotation. Shadow is also a prime example of what it means to have a broken spec that's held up by crutches called expansion systems, aka Azurite essences and corruptions. This is something I really hope the devs stop doing, which is not balancing a spec because it's too difficult, or designing it in this case and creating band-aid systems to make it actually function, let alone perform. There are also niche changes to the spec that make the rotation feel even worse, like Void Bolt being usable without breaking Mind Flay but still incurring a GCD that just feels incredibly hard and cumbersome to use efficiently. Same with Mind Blast, creating artificial downtime. Lingering Insanity should be baseline at this point, since without it, there really isn't a big reason to have one long Void phase, or at least a satisfying reward for being in a long Void form phase. Be that as it may, the fact remains that Lingering Insanity is one of the few things that makes the spec work and feel at least half decent. Having it as a talent makes the whole row a dead row with no real options. And this is a similar issue with the first row where Shadow Word Void is just too good to make the spec work. And I'm saying work and not perform because the damage you gain from these is not the issue, but more that the playstyle feels incredibly incomplete without these two specific options. The Shadow community has a few public forum posts about the feedback, and I recommend you guys check them out, links in the description, since the devs are actually listening to it, and we can only hope our video does some good to raise awareness to the issues Shadow has. And of course, we'd like to thank our patrons for supporting our content time and time again. We appreciate and love you guys, and hope this shows in the increasing quality and energy and excitement that we have for upcoming videos. And if you're interested in supporting us a little bit more, check the Patreon links down below. Thank you for watching the video, and we'll see you next time.
You are the solution. gotta meet someone.